And in a building like mine, a Bohemian building like mine, where the people used to conduct the symphony and be ballet dancers and be
Right.
pop stars, and um, now it's people who work in finance.
Mhm.
And I think that something is gained for those people, but something is lost for those of us who are not those people. That the sense of this city as a creative place, I think, has been greatly diminished.
Welcome to our latest episode of Book Reporter Talks to. Our guest today is Chris Pavone, and we are going to be talking about his latest book, The Doorman, which is a Book Reporter Bets On selection. I love this book, and this interview is being done pre-pub, so I don't have what our reviewer is going to say yet. So I'm going to have to share what some others are saying. Somebody like Stephen King, who says, Chris Pavone has always been good, but this novel is way better than good. Kind of novel that wins book awards. Cynical, tender, sharp, dense, funny, and loaded with inside dope about how New York works and how it doesn't. Doorman is a bonfire of the vanities for the 21st century. He gives it to both sides of the culture wars and both with smoking barrels. And then Publishers Weekly says this adrenaline pumping thriller from bestseller Pavone delivers a lacerating, Tom Wolfe worthy dissection of Manhattan society in the post COVID era. Page turning from the opening paragraph to its killer, literally, finale. So that's what we've got. That intro. Welcome, Chris. It's great to be in conversation with you again.
Thanks so much for having me again. Great to see you, Carol.
So, can you share an overview? Just give us like your elevator pitch of what the doorman is about. I'm dying to hear this.
You're dying to hear this. The Doorman is a thriller about race and class and privilege, and I'm so glad to hear other people refer to it as the bonfire of the vanities because
Mhm,
that's how I've always thought about it.
mhm.
It's a story that revolves around a doorman at a fancy New York apartment house who gets caught up in a web of adultery, robbery, and murder.
Ooh, yeah. Good line. Good, good, good. Very
Thank you.
impressed. I was trying to figure out how you're going to do that one. Okay, so you live in a famous building that's much like the Bohemia. When did you realize this was such a perfect place to set the book?
Well, I have always been interested in the upstairs downstairs dynamic of especially city life, and I feel like even though this situation that I'm living in is definitely a very specific thing to New York City, living in an apartment house with people of vastly different economic strata and a building staff who are also extremely different from the people who live in the building, and all of us thrown together every day and living elbow to elbow. And that I've always felt is a very powerful way of looking at America. And I think one of the great things about the New York novel, and there's a long, great, rich history of New York novels that are really about so much more than New York. The thing about a city is that all of the issues are present all of the time, whether it's
Mhm.
race and racism or class and income inequality or political conflict or religious strife. It's all, we have it all the time.
Mhm.
And it can't be ignored in the way that it can be ignored elsewhere. We don't have gated communities. We're not shut off in suburbia. We are with each other all of the time. And in that way, it presents this opportunity to take the issues of the day and boil them down to relationships between individual people who are in natural um, not just conflict with each other, but in relationships with each
Mhm.
other, because that's what city life is. But so, although it's specifically about city life and specifically about people living in the type of building that I live in, it is also, I think, about America
Mhm.
right now.
Mhm. I agree with you. Agree with you. And the building itself is a character, and you've got the details about it so well layered, coming in from the characters' points of view. And I love the way they're telling the story instead of you just narrating, this is what the building is like, this is how it goes. Did you have a lot of facts you were thinking about how do you use, or did they come in naturally about how you're just going to explain how this whole thing works?
The whole thing being the building. I try not to let facts get in the way of my stories. And
Mm.
I I do a tremendous amount of research sometimes, and then I end up deleting 99% of the research that I've shoehorned into books because fundamentally, I don't really want to read books that are about facts. That's what nonfiction is for. When I come to fiction for character and tension between characters and plot, and none of that really has much to do with facts. The facts are there to support the rest of it, not the other way around, as far as I'm concerned. And although there are a lot of details about the Bohemia in this book, they're all made up. I mean, although I live in a building that is much like the Bohemia, I went to great pains to make sure that nothing in the novel matches anything in my real life. Not the building itself, not the super, not the shifts that the people work, not the residents, not the co-op board meetings. None of that has any no reflection on reality.
No reaction. But you know everybody's going to go up and go, I know that's me. I know that's me. You
Yes,
know
yes,
about
yes. They
me.
are going to, but they're
Is
going to
that
be
my
wrong.
apartment? Is
Yeah,
that my apartment that you're talking about? Because you know the way
exactly.
people are, you know.
Yeah. I
No,
mean, the
three
one
people
thing
said, yeah.
that is true is one of the characters in this book, Julian Sonnenberg, lives in the least fancy apartment in the most fancy building.
Right.
And that's sort of me. I live in the least fancy apartment in this fancy building.
And you go to the board meetings with the people who have the much fancier, who have ripped the whole thing out and done it apart. It's really
Yeah,
interesting.
I don't go to the board meetings
You'll
though.
go.
That's the thing. Yeah.
You skip. Okay, that's good. That's good. So, how did you come up with the name of the building? Because that's something as well, the Bohemia. Tell me where the idea for the name came from.
I wanted the building itself to sound like it's been here forever and that it harkens back to a different moment in New York history. And I feel like I'm 56 years old, which also happens to be the same age that Tom Wolfe was when he
Mm,
published The Bonfire of the Vanities. And I grew up in New York, but it was a very, very different type of New York than we live in now. And I lived in a very different part of it. And I grew up in a part of Brooklyn where in the 1960s and 70s, people did not move to with undergraduate degrees and entry level jobs in finance. If you moved to Brooklyn in the 1970s, you were doing it because you were immigrating from Haiti or St. Lucia, and that's where your cousin lived. Now it's a very different city in a lot of ways. And I think, to me, at least in my experience, that has manifested itself most visibly in not just gentrification, which has been obviously a juggernaut here in New York City, but in a very large shift away from the things that people used to do here in the city and used to be valued in New York. People in the arts, people who came here to be writers, to be actors, to be dancers, to make art of some sort or another, to participate in the culture. And now people come here just to make money. And the cultural class has been replaced by the financial class. And
mhm,
it's, in fact, it's not just in New York, it's this entire country has shifted away from making things
mhm,
to just making money. That so
mhm.
much of what people want to do now is simply find new ways to chisel off their little bit of this immense pie of the American economy. And it doesn't matter to them if they're adding value or creating something. It just matters to them that they are making money for themselves. And I feel like this greed, which has been obviously a big part of America since the 1980s when The Bonfire of the Vanities was published, has ingrained itself so much in our ethos that we don't even consider it odd anymore that we don't make anything and that people don't come to New York or America to make art anymore. If you want to do that, you go to Berlin or you go to Mexico City. You don't come to New York. You don't go to Los Angeles. And in a building like mine, a bohemian building like mine, where the people used to conduct the symphony and be ballet dancers and be
Right.
pop stars, and now it's people who work in finance.
Mhm.
And I think that something is gained for those people, but something is lost for those of us who are not those people. That the sense of this city as a creative place, I think, has been greatly diminished.
I really, yes, I'm thinking back on that because, I started working in the city in 78 and I was working at Condé Nast and it was, think about what the company was like then and think about where we are now. We had models on covers of magazines. It wasn't a celebrity fed culture, which is where we are now. It's money and celebrity fed. And you definitely tap into exactly what it's like when the only thing you're measured by is how much money you have. When are you going to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
wheels up? When are you going to do this? And I was thinking of that show that's running on Apple right now, Friends and Neighbors, where it's like you have the house, you have the pool, but I've got a bigger pool. And I was out with somebody years ago, and they said they just got a plane. And it was like not a big plane. I said, "Oh, that's really great. You got a plane." I thought it was really cool. And he turns around and he goes, "Yeah, but so and so's got a bigger plane." And I was like, "Oh, that." Oh, your yacht is bigger. That's the game you get into. I just get into glad you got a plane. That's kind of cool,
Yeah,
different world.
yeah.
Different world. So
I
let's
think we now live in a world where the pursuit of money qua money is not only defensible but is lauded, is a goal that young people sitting in college think that's the thing that I want to do. And I feel like I that didn't used to be the case. People used to have a different type of ambition, and they hoped that money would come with it.
hmm
But it was never, people weren't sitting around when I was in college thinking, my God, I want a plane. And now that is what people want and what people expect out of what success means. And success itself has become extremely hard to measure and
hmm
extremely hard to feel that you've achieved in a world in which you're measuring your success against tens of billions of dollars. Then what does it mean to be successful if that's what you're aiming at?
hmm Yeah, it's what is the measure these days? Is it only money? Seems like it is. And it seems like, every kid that's coming out of school, it's got to be six figures. You're like 9,100 when I got out, 9,100. And I was like, wow, this is, and it kind of computes to what entry level in publishing is right now. It sort of computes out to that. So it's really, really crazy. So
But the
let's
nice
talk.
thing about publishing, I think still, and I've only ever worked in publishing in my whole life. And for the first half, I was mostly a book editor. And for the
Mhm,
second half, I've mostly been a novelist. The thing that I do love about book publishing in New York City is that nobody gets into book publishing to get rich. And
mhm,
in fact, nobody actually gets rich. I mean, some people make a comfortable living, but nobody has a plane. Nobody's thinking they're ever going to have a plane. And people who come to New York for a reason other than to get rich, I find that I like those people. Those are
mhm,
my people. And I've been glad to spend the past 35 years of my life with those people.
mhm. And people who are kind, people who are not going to walk all over you to get ahead.
Well, most
Whereas
of them, yeah.
well, most of them, yeah. But we know, like, come on, we know the types. But what I'm saying is, on a whole, it's not like it's you need to get fired to get me ahead. You need to do this and that, which is really what the financial world is a lot alike. It's, I'm going to step over you or step on you to get where I'm going to go.
Yeah.
But
Then
let's talk
part of
about
the
the
tension
other
and
side. Yeah,
yeah,
there's Chicky Diaz, which I think
yeah.
is like a great name, who's
Thank you.
everybody's favorite doorman at the Bohemia. So tell us about him because he's got a lot going on in his life. He comes in uniform, but there's another guy.
Yeah, he sure does. And Chicky Diaz, the real life inspiration for Chicky Diaz is, in fact, the real life inspiration for this book. And we moved into this building 5 years ago. It's the first time in my life. I've lived in New York really my whole life, but this building is the first time I've ever lived in a full service building with
Mhm,
doormen and with other staff who run out into the street and grab your bags from you and hail cabs and want to help you find a parking space and things like that. And although I love these guys and they're extremely nice and extremely generous and they're great company, I have never stopped being uncomfortable
mhm,
with that type of subservient relationship.
mhm,
It
mhm,
wasn't until I was in my 50s that I first experienced it. And some people live their whole lives that way and get used to having people around who just do things for you.
mhm,
And I never have. And so I dealt with my discomfort by spending a lot of time talking to these guys. And in particular, one, a daytime doorman named Johnny, who worked in this building for 37 years. It's the only job he ever had. And Chicky had an incredible warmth that you could see from across the street. And he spent his entire life out there greeting the people who live here and plenty of people who don't, and the neighborhood people and their kids and their dogs, and the tourists who never stop taking pictures, always with great humor. And I would talk to him every day. And when I first lived here, we would talk about the Mets and the Yankees and his softball team and anti-inflammatories for our middle-aged man knees and the classic R&B of the 1970s. But then Johnny got sick.
mhm,
And it was the super who pointed out, wow, you don't look so good. And the next day he was in the hospital and he didn't emerge for months. And when he finally did emerge, all he wanted to do was get back to work as soon as possible.
mhm.
And for the next 2 years, this guy came to work and he held the cabs and he carried the bags and he held the door while also definitely dying.
Yeah.
And at the end of one shift, somebody asked him how he was feeling, and he said, I'm so tired, man. And he went home and he died. And he had lived his entire life on the same block in Harlem, a few miles from here. But he had arranged for his memorial service to be held a couple of blocks from here so that the people he worked for could come to his service. And he was buried in his full doorman uniform, complete with cap on. The only non regulation item was he had a New York Mets pin on his tie.
Wow.
And before he died, we'd spent that time, instead of talking about softball and baseball, talking about God and the meaning of life and what the point of it all is for. And we had this very intense relationship, 5 or 10 minutes at a time.
Hmm.
He knew he was dying, I knew he was dying, and we could talk about other things with that out there on the table. There was a certain refreshing fatalism to it. But his memorial service and his that those last couple of years of his life, when he knew he was not going to make it, and still he came to work every day,
Wow.
that broke my heart, really.
Hmm.
And that made me want to take a close look at this type of relationship in this type of building where people who live such different lives, and Johnny and I were roughly the same age. We grew up in the same city. My high school football team played his high school football team in the first round of the 1984 citywide playoffs when I played my few snaps with a slightly torn ACL. And although we grew up together, we lived such different lives,
Hmm.
just a few miles apart, but we converged right here on that sidewalk every day. And I think that's one of the magical things about New York City is
Hmm.
that we are all thrust together, elbow to elbow, all the time.
Hmm. I can imagine just I'm hearing you tell these stories, and I'm thinking of the number of people who just walked past and knew nothing about him, maybe knew his name, didn't know anything else, and didn't care. They wanted the cab, they wanted their bags carried, this, that, the other thing. He was someone who got them to their next place.
Yeah,
And then all of a sudden, he's person. And who are these people? We used to be friends with the security guards in our old building. It was really funny. And they used to come up and get books on Friday
yeah.
afternoons, and they come up and go shopping on the bookshelves. And it was like we knew the people, and it made a big difference in how you feel about people. Instead of this, yeah, you're right. And that's the way too much of America is right now. We just walk past. We don't sit and chat. We don't engage. It's this non-engaging thing. So well, you've got this brilliant setting with
Mm.
Bohemia, New York, and then make it easier to delve into characters because you've got your backdrop is so solid. It's been there for a while. It's not really changing. And instead, you've got this cast of characters you can create besides Chicky and what Chicky's doing. And how was that to sit there and say, okay, who's going to be in the rest of my story? I got my good guy. Where's everybody else?
Well, I wanted to invent a small tight cast of characters, the core characters who occupy different points along the political and wealth spectrum, and
Hmm.
throw them together and put myself into their shoes and ask, what would I do and how would I act? And I think largely that's what being a novelist is in a lot of ways, is to invent people who are not quite you
Hmm.
and think, what would I do in this situation? And these people, these three main characters, all have a complicated relationship with one another. And all of them is in love with somebody in this story, and their how that manifests itself is very different in the different relationships. And I think we know from the very get-go in this book, from the very opening line, that somebody is going to get killed.
Hmm.
And part of your journey as a reader is to discover who that is and
Hmm.
when and how, and I think most interestingly, why. And all of those questions have to do with not just the relationships between the people, but also this larger political moment that we're living in as Americans and the political moment that these people are living in as individuals and trying to make their way in the world. And I think one of the interesting things to try think about these days, especially in my life and my social acquaintances, is what does it mean right now to be on the left? And who gets to define that?
Hmm.
And I think people on the right are probably having that same struggle themselves. I don't know that many people on the right,
Hmm.
but I do know that here in the world that I occupy, people have vastly different visions of what it
Hmm.
means and vastly phew, virulent intolerances for
Hmm.
people who disagree ever so slightly
Hmm.
on the 1% of the issues that separate us instead of on the 99% of the issues that unite us. I'm
Hmm.
sorry for the noise going by. It was an
No.
Entenmann's truck.
You're right. It's like fine. It's fine. We have a bird that sings outside. I had to close the door. It's driving me crazy. 5 notes every day. It starts at 5:10 a.m. too. But it's interesting because the characters, you've got Emily Longworth, her husband Whit, and Julian Sonnenberg. So you've got these three people But I like that we were labeling them by their apartment numbers, which says a lot. So it's like, this is what's happening front door. This is what's happening this floor. This is what's happening this floor. So as a result, you're seeing, okay, the difference between the Longworths and the Sonnenberg. You're seeing a difference of what's going on. But you're also really clear there on what kind of a space you're in when you're talking, whether you're at the front door, walking up towards the street, or whatever. Was the labeling of the people by numbers, like floors, always there? Was that something you always knew you were going to do, or did that come along the way?
That was always there.
Was-
I'm a very visual writer. I think of the stories in a very sensory way, and I really want readers to be able to see the
Mhm.
environment that we're in and to feel it, and sometimes to hear it, to even smell it or taste it. All of those things are important to me to communicate. And I'm not. I have no value judgment on authors who don't tell you even remotely where the story is taking place. I think those stories are fantastic too. That's just not what I'm trying to do. I want you to know where you are.
Mhm.
And I want you to have a feeling of what that is. And in this case, working the front door, standing out on the sidewalk, in the weather, in the rain, with the dog shit, with the papers that you need to sweep up whenever it wins, with the rats running around across the street. That's a very different experience from the person 10 floors up, but in the same, the same moment on the map, the same spot on the map, who's living in a $30 million apartment that costs $15 million to renovate.
Mhm.
Still, they want to buy the place next door to make it even bigger.
Yeah.
And the fact that those two experiences exist at the same spot on the map is something that I wanted to examine, but I wanted also readers to try to feel what it's like to be there.
And people outside the city, I think, are going to understand it because if you haven't been to the city, you're still going to see what all these places look like. You're going to understand because you're going to know this is vastly different from well, usually what you're used to. And besides that, there's a difference in each of these places: the front door, the floor 11, and wherever else you're going in the building. There's a lot of politics, which I usually prefer to skip in a book, but
Yeah.
the way you write about it here, through the eyes of the characters, it so works for me. You show the hypocrisy that exists on both sides. And while there are no solutions here, you're laying out the canvas of it and on a bigger canvas, what the country is like. It's like I feel like I'm seeing the whole thing. Did you go into the book planning to do that, or was that something that evolved as you started writing? Because you're really bringing up so many issues. And then I'm like, oh, I'm laughing at that one, though. I'm not even taking that seriously.
Yeah. I intended to do that, but I also pretty deliberately wanted the politics to be there in service to character and plot.
Mhm,
The politics are not there so that I can stand on a soapbox and
mhm,
yell at you about what I think. And in fact, the politics are not what I think. The politics are what those characters think. And none of those characters is me. What I wanted to do in this story was to make it a thriller and something of a mystery and also something of a love story, all of which rely on the politics of our moment to drive the plot forward. So the politics and the social commentary, they're not there to be the point of the book. The point
mhm.
of the book is really the relationships between these characters and the journey, the exciting journey, I hope, of being in a thriller. And those things are supported by the politics, not the other way around.
Yeah, yeah. It was terrific. I love the moment when Bitsy, who's Emily's daughter, is asking for land acknowledgement at dinner for the Lenape Indians and that the Bohemia is on the land taken from them each night at dinner. And I feel like you had fun writing that. Is it true? Had a little bit, like a little tiny bit of fun?
You know what? I had fun writing the whole thing, and I enjoy, I have to admit, this is a really, really great job. And I sit around and I make things up, and then people like you say incredibly nice things about it. And that's a very joyous thing to do. But also, I I love inventing characters who I love, and I love all of the characters in this book. I love the three main characters. I love that little girl Bitsy. I love her brother who had weighed his poop this morning. I love so many of the people, and I love their failings and I love their challenges. I love the problems that they face, and I love the solutions that they come up with at the end of this incredibly fatal day that they're all living in. The book takes place largely over the course of one day, from
Hmm.
the morning when everybody wakes up until um, late at night when not everybody survives. And although there's some backstory, it's really meant to be lived in real time. That it will take you as long to read this book as sort of the day will take. And I use the fallow periods when in a normal life nothing happens and you're reading the newspaper. That's when backstory happens.
Mhm.
But all of these people, all of them, I love all of them, and I miss them now that I'm no longer living with them. Obviously, they're made up and they're in my imagination, and so it's I can visit them whenever I want, but I miss working with them. I miss telling their story.
And you could tell because there's a lot in the pages where you've really built strong characters and the relationships that they've got with each other. But you can tell the way you're telling your stories, you were completely invested. There's no character that I feel was not written completely. And that's a
Thank you.
huge thing in a book. It's really because sometimes it's like, oh, that one was like slid in and it's all caricature. And they're not because they're all multi-layered about who they are. And I saw that as I was reading. We
Thank
also
you.
live on Lenape land here, so I think that tonight at dinner I'll say this to my husband just to make him laugh. I will do this. In fact, when my son was in fourth grade, you studied that New Jersey, and I went and built a Lenape tent, okay, or abode, right? I'm there, and at the same time, it was the early days of the book report. We had people investing in us, and we got our biggest investment. And I'm putting the cabin together, and they're going, "Carol, do you want to approve this?" And I'm like, "Sure, but I got to tie the string over here first." So it's very funny. The Lenapes have I have a very warm place in my heart for them. So then we've got this paycheck to paycheck life of Chicky. Well, the others are deciding what time will be wheels up to Aspen. What
Yeah.
time are you on the early flight? Oh, your plane is what? And da 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 da. Was one part easier to write than the other? Was Chicky's life easier for you to write than everybody else's, or are they all kind of the same?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know that one part was easier to write than the other. I mean, one of the characters, the Julian Sonnenberg, who is a middle-aged guy who works in the arts and lives in the least fancy apartment in a fancy building and has been married a long time and has two kids and an aging dog. Um, that looks a lot like me.
Mhm.
Uh, but he's not me, and the things he does are not the things that I do, and the way he sees the world are not the ways that I see the world. And to some extent, even though he has the most in common with me, he may have been the hardest to write
Mhm.
because I was very deliberately not writing me, but writing somebody who looks on the surface like me. Um, I think it was may have been Chicky who was the easiest for me to write
Mhm.
because I saw him most clearly, not his life, but his way of being, his way of talking, his way of moving as that Johnny Doorman, who I knew, who inspired the story. And I didn't know that much about Johnny's real life. I mean, the things we talked about were at first very superficial and then very deep, but they weren't very biographical. And I don't know about his relationship with his ex-wife or his children or almost anything about him. But I do know how he interacted with the world and how he spoke and how he moved his body as he
Mhm.
spoke and how he looked at his job. And all of those were things that were very easy for me to imagine because I witnessed them firsthand in a way that I didn't witness so much of the other characters' lives firsthand, even though one of those characters seems a lot more like me.
Than the others. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's also interesting too because Chicky's talking about how things have changed over the years as well. He
Yeah.
used to hail cabs. No one gets a cab anymore. Everyone's going to their Uber or they're trying to unpack their car. And that was that little moment where you saw how much New York has changed. You could usually never get a yellow cab. Now you can usually get a yellow cab any place. And I usually try to take them because I realize that those are the guys, if I'm going to take that transportation, because they're the guys that bought a medallion and there's the
Yeah.
guys that are invested in it. So I will always hail a yellow cab before I get an Uber because I realize these are the people who kept the city going for so long. Yet you see them with their lights on going by hour after hour wherever you are in the city where they never used to be like that. Are you seeing the same thing or am I just, imagining it? None is.
Absolutely. And also, both my dad and my uncle were New York City taxi drivers.
Yeah.
And owning a medallion was a big thing for a long time. And I feel like now that the taxis are just one part of this thing that we've allowed to happen in America, where all of the services that used to be provided by individual proprietors are now provided by tech companies.
Mhm.
And we are increasingly giving money to incredibly rich people and they're incredibly rich investors who get richer by the day because these stocks go up so much because Americans use these services so much that there's really no reason most of the time to call an Uber instead of a yellow cab. You can even hail a yellow cab on an app. But nevertheless, we are choosing to give our money, to give these cuts of our money to these delivery services and these ride shares and these online retailers and all these ways that tech has carved out a large chunk of all of our transactions in a way that used to be the corner drugstore and the bodega owner. And what drives me nuts in New York right now is that the Amazon trucks will pull to a stop, double park in the middle of an avenue, which is obviously public space, create public problems of traffic jams, and they will park directly in front of a grocery store or a drugstore and then deliver items to people in these buildings instead of people buying them from the stores whose
Right there.
traffic is being blocked by the Amazon truck. While they are not paying taxes on this storefront that they park in the middle of Columbus Avenue, and they're undercutting the people whose businesses actually make up the fabric of our society.
Mhm.
And if we continue to just buy everything in this way and use all these services that the money is being shuffled off to people on their private compounds in Hawaii, then we will end up with communities that don't have any active storefronts and don't have any small businesses and don't have any of the richness of life that comes with interacting with your neighbors out in the marketplaces of America. And I think that that's tragic. And I don't, how did we get onto the subject?
Well,
I don't,
we're talking about
yeah.
the difference
Oh,
between,
yellow taxis.
but
Yeah.
you know what though? Yeah, we're talking about taxes. But you know what? I agree with you. And one thing is, I mean, I come in from New Jersey. I mean, everybody goes, "How do you feel about congestion pricing?" I said, to be honest with you, I don't come in enough to think it's a big deal for me because I don't come in that often. If I can have less traffic, great. But I'm thinking about the working class guy that this is mattering a whole lot to coming in right now. And yeah, the streets are less crowded, but those trucks. I mean, I used to come in and go up to 57, then come in at at the Lincoln Tunnel and go uptown, and I'm like, I'm just not getting uptown because everybody's parked in the middle of the street. It's got nothing to do with the traffic. It's got, you're exactly right, where the trucks are, where everything that's going on. And that's become the fabric of the city now. The fabric of the city is around deliveries and what's going on with deliveries instead of people just walking around. It's people walking around in these empty trucks all day long. I don't know. Well, let's get back to your layering and suspense with social commentary. And thus, this book has this really good rhythm. It's got this rhythm going, and the rhythm really ramps up towards the end. Like it's like, did you work on balancing the two of the social commentary, which is really, it has to be a part of this book, and then, okay, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to ramp up the suspense too?
Oh, absolutely. A very big part of what I do is move things around and try to create peaks and valleys for the suspense. And I think um, I myself don't really enjoy novels that are nonstop action. I think
Mhm.
people sometimes talk about fast-paced books and wanting fast-paced books as if that means that the pace is fast all the time. I think when the pace is fast all the time, it's not credible. It's not, it's exhausting, and in a way, it's boring. If somebody is constantly under mortal threat, in many, many different ways, it ceases to be credible. And if it ceases to be credible, then it's no longer exciting. I think I'm much more interested in creating a story where periods of less tension are what make the periods of tension seem all the more exciting. And I don't mean by periods of less tension boring. I just mean that they're not filled with anxiety about mortal peril. I am constantly trying to ask questions and withhold answers. And
Mhm.
some of those questions are explicit. Sometimes you, as a reader, know that I've posed a question, but very often you don't. And I am constantly trying to layer in hints that we are in a story of suspense. You are waiting for a piece of information, but you don't even know what type of information that is. And
Mhm.
that honestly takes a great deal of work.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's
I
not,
can
it's work
tell.
that I really enjoy doing. I love puzzles. I love doing puzzles. And I feel like, in a way, my books are puzzles. And in this very specific way, you're in a puzzle and you don't even necessarily know you're in a puzzle until you think you have the solution. And then you think to yourself, oh, that's what's going on here, and then you turn out to be wrong.
Yeah.
And it's not until the very end that you find out, oh, that's what's really going on here.
Those are really all the pieces. That's how all the pieces are coming together, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
I also love that Wit watches Succession and felt it was instructional. How much fun was it writing that line? He watches it for ideas about what to do. Love that.
Yeah, Wit is a minor character. He has a major role in this book. He's the husband of Emily, who's probably the main character of the book. Um, and she has discovered that her husband is, in her own words, a villain. And he did not present himself as a villain when they were dating. She didn't deliberately go out and marry a villain, and she also didn't go out looking to marry a rich guy. It was just the choice that was put in front of her at a certain vulnerable moment in your life when she was broke and it looked like she was going to be broke forever and her career wasn't necessarily working out in the way that she hoped it was. And all of a sudden, here was this man who was maybe not a perfect man, but he had, for all intents and purposes, an unlimited amount of money.
Mhm.
And what is the choice in front of her then? And she chose to take this man, to marry him, knowing that with that she could do whatever she wanted. And I don't mean just buy an apartment that she wanted. She could have an impact in whatever worlds that she wanted to participate in. She could give away huge amounts of money, which she does. She could spend her time volunteering for causes that she believes in, which she does. She could raise children who share her values, which she does. And in exchange for all of that, she has to be married to a guy who she increasingly can't stand. And I
Mhm.
wanted to put readers into this position of asking yourself, what would you do? What
Mhm.
would you do?
And we're thinking about what would you do? And then later on, we meet her parents and we understand so many of her decisions by these quick conversations with her parents. And you get why she did what she did. And you
Yes.
get there's a quick line about like her mother not cooking. And you get these little tidbits and you're like, okay, now I see exactly where she was. And her parents don't have a major role. Those few pages you're getting, that's where you went. That's where you became. So I also love that Julian wears back to black tie and takes mass transit the same way you did a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
I used to do the same to go to the National Book Awards. The one train was like right outside the office. So I'd get there and everybody go like, why are you doing that? And I said, because I'm not going to be able to find my car later and I'm going to want to go home. So I'd get back on the subway and go uptown and you'd see a few people on the subway, but not many. Many would be still waiting for their car. So I thought that it was like the way things are seen. It's like I thought faster. It's a faster way to get there. But it's interesting how things are seen the yin and yang. Like if you get in a black car, are you saying something? If you get in the subway, are you saying something? Am I on the track there of what Julian's sitting there saying is I'm this guy and I'm here.
Yeah. I mean, Julian, I think, does it largely as a way of proving to people that he's not trying to pretend that he has more money than he does, which is not the same reason that I do it, which I do. I don't wear tuxedos a lot, but it happens a couple of times a year. And I always take the subway or a bus to do it. And partly it's because I think I feel like less of a douchebag on the subway than I would in the back of a suburban. But mostly it's because the experience is fun. That almost always somebody says something to me, and I have a conversation with somebody on the subway that I otherwise would not have had because they want to know what the hell I'm up to wearing a tuxedo on a subway. And I don't think I look like I'm a maitre d', and I'm not. This is not commuting time for maitre d's. But it's very enjoyable to me to have those conversations with strangers. And I love being able to integrate myself into the fabric of New York in unusual ways. And it's always enjoyable for me to get on the subway wearing a tuxedo. I
Yeah.
feel a little bit ridiculous, but I never feel like an asshole.
No, no, no. I
Yeah,
got on the bus one time, right at our office was blocked from the Penguin Random House building. We got on, and there was an editor, I don't remember his name at this point, and we were going down to like the Marriott Marquis for an event, and it was raining, and he had an umbrella, and he goes, "A girl in a little black dress, and I've got a little black umbrella." And it was just the funniest line walking into the room because I was like, "Yeah, I forgot my umbrella, so I'm glad you have one." You know,
yeah,
there are those moments that are quintessentially New York in a lot of ways, but people don't understand that is it. That is
yeah.
what's supposed to be. I also love that originally Emily's husband Wit was aghast at moving to the West Side. And
Uh,
the numbered buildings, I love this part because I never really thought about this, but 1025, et cetera, on the East Side were where the money went. And I love this as an exception. I never thought about that was not the cool place to be being with all the buildings with the names and all the others are with the numbers. Very interesting. I hadn't considered that much. So here's some apartment trivia. This is New York apartment trivia that you may or may not know. When we had our old office on 7th Avenue and 55th, the building across the street from us was Wyoming. And the Wyoming was built before the Dakota, around the same time, by the developer Edward Clark, who also developed the Dakota. And in 1880, had the architect Henry Hardenberg began the Dakota, they also started the five-story Wyoming because they thought no one would go that far uptown. Isn't that crazy?
That is
So
crazy.
it's at the southeast corner. And one thing that people would, not want to do this. And the current Wyoming was rebuilt. I just thought this was like fascinating. I wanted to get Fiona Davis out to write out of my office and write about the Wyoming. I thought that was a great idea. She got great humor out of that. But it's kind of interesting that there's this fabric of New York of these old buildings that we see and we can say, oh, that's beautiful architecture on that or whatever. But you really take us inside the place of what it was and what it meant, like, for a number of years, where the pop stars were there and people were standing outside taking pictures.
Yeah.
I was
Thank
there
you.
the night John Lennon died. I was standing outside the Dakota. It just happened to be a friend was in from out of town. And I said to her, this is the building where a lot of people live like John Lennon. And I got home that night, and it was a really good chance that his murder was standing right next to me when I was out there, and I never had a thought. And that has always stayed in my head of it was this moment of like this, like colliding right on the street in front of me.
Yeah.
So, but they're not the artists anymore. This is like, blah, blah, blah. So when you sat down, did you have the whole story in your head? Did you know this is where we're going to go, or do you have a little piece?
Unfortunately, I did not. And in general, I'm a very, very deliberate writer, and I plan out a lot. I do a lot of character sketching, and I write a sort of book proposal for a novel before I start writing it. I spend a lot of time working on writing about the book before I write the book in a way that life is not as long as we want it to be. It takes me a while to write a book. I'm not going to be able to do it an infinite number of times, and I want to make sure that everyone is my best shot. But when I started writing this book, we were in the midst of COVID,
Mhm.
and I was not working well for reasons that are obvious in hindsight, but I didn't see clearly at the time. And I didn't do the hard work of doing all of that. And I had the setting, I had some main characters, I had themes I knew I wanted to explore, I had some of their relationships that I knew. There were some parts about America, about our hatreds for each other that I definitely wanted to be in this book. And that was a lot. And I thought I had enough to get going. But it turns out it was not everything. And I didn't really know what the plot was going to be. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how these characters' interwoven threads were going to unravel and how it was going to become explosive. I didn't take the time to figure that out. And I thought that I could just figure that out on the fly. And so I just started writing. And as it turns out, I could not figure it out on the fly. And I spent a very long time writing a little bit pointlessly, lots of scenes that didn't end up in this book, and dead ends, and characters who I cut entirely, passages that didn't really serve a real purpose. And I knew that I was procrastinating. And the reason I was writing all of this was because I didn't want to stop and do this hard work of not writing. And not when you want to write, not writing is actually hard. It's
Mhm.
hard to prevent yourself from, I have a scene I want to write. I see this 1,500 words so clearly. I want to get this down on paper. That's fun. And it doesn't even count as work. The work sometimes, for me at least, is figuring out what the hell actually this story should be, what should go on in part one, part two, part three, break down the chapters, examine how you're going to have peaks and valleys and who is going to interact how and how you're going to build suspense and what questions you're going to pose and when are you going to reveal the answers and what are these reveals going to be? 10, 15 different reveals, discoveries by the reader. How are you going to pace those out? What are they going to be? That's all really a lot harder than typing.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I realized that I was possibly going to be writing this book forever and never getting to the end that I said, all right, stop, put it aside, start from scratch, figure it out, figure it out. And then I basically started from scratch after I figured it out. And I threw away a lot. And what I kept, I revised seriously or moved around. And I very, very deliberately then constructed an outline of what was going to go on when and why. And the why is a big part of it. That it's one thing to know what it is you want to go on in a story, but a big question that I'm constantly asking myself is why is this here? And if I can't justify to myself why it's here, then it shouldn't be there.
Hmm. I think that that's what comes across in the book because it's very, when you're reading, you're seeing the story unfolding, and there are reasons for why you're hearing this now. You know, when we talked a couple of years ago, you talked about how people never get out of their comfort zones, and you liked doing that with Two Nights in Lisbon. And here I feel like you're talking about that again because you're
Yeah.
showing people both sides. You're showing people who's not happy with where they are and things like that. Am I correct that that same mission of yours is still there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's one of the things that's really desperately wrong with America right now is that we live in these very, very siloed media environments when we're only really confronted with facts and opinions that confirm what we already believe, and we're not forced to examine any evidence to the contrary. And so we just continually reinforce our own beliefs and reinforce our own prejudices and hatreds, and never need to look at something else. And I'm not a novelist to convince people to change their minds about how to behave in the world. That's not what I feel is my responsibility to this world. I want to tell stories that I think are enjoyable and exciting and surprising. And I think one of the ways that I've chosen to do that, at least in the past couple of books, is to present people with what looks like a type of story that they recognize, and it turns out to be a different type of story, and that they're in something that they didn't entirely expect, and they're being exposed to opinions that they don't necessarily share. And some of those opinions are definitely my own, but in this book, again, largely those opinions are not my own. Those are the opinions of these made up characters who represent, I wouldn't say people I know, but types of people who exist in the world around me
Hmm.
that I try to get down onto paper. And I think it's important, especially at this moment right now, and especially on the left, for people to recognize that there is a diversity of opinion, and
Hmm.
that just because you disagree about one thing doesn't make you an enemy.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's true right now because it's vicious. It's just vicious on all sides of what's going on. It's like whoosh, 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 whoosh. I told you my younger son's girlfriend worked as a concierge in one of the apartment buildings on the Upper West,
Yeah.
and I tell her I can't wait for her to read this book. I said to her, look, I've only got my galley, so you're not getting that. I have all my notes in it and stuff like that, all my folded down pages. But I said, you've got to get this. But the funny thing is, one night she just said, that's it. It was like Mother's Day last year, and she says, I'm gone. Like I'm leaving. I just can't one more time do something for some. I think it was a somebody who was an influencer, and I just can't do this anymore. Like she literally took over her uniform and said, it's over. I'm gone,
Uh,
and she's now working in an ER in a hospital. And I said to her, so what do you think? And she goes, it's kind of like the same. There's a lot of demands. She goes, it's just a little bit different. At the apartment, so many things were treated like they were as important as death. Like I'm going to die if this doesn't happen. So she said, it's kind of like the demands are similar, but you're sitting there going a different outcome of what's going on. But you realize how much your whole life was all day about this one particular thing happening, this one
yeah.
particular way, or you were in trouble, or it was a problem, and how people would kind of rat you out on what was going on. And she said, it's like you're doing everything all day long to make everybody happy. And it's like, what did I do? So,
Yeah. Well, that's too bad. I think there are a lot of unreasonable people in this world, but I also think that especially in the New York experience that I've had with doormen and concierges, that the what looks like the job, which is the job description, is maybe to hold the door and to carry bags and to hail cabs. That's not really the job, and the
mm-mm,
job is really to be a person out there in the world who other people interact with in a pleasant way, and to make their lives better. And sometimes that making their lives better is changing a light bulb, or
mm-mm,
taking a delivery, or
mm-mm,
helping somebody come in when it's pouring rain. But mostly it's just being a person to interact with in a city that can be very lonely and very isolating, even amongst millions and millions of people. That they're this connection to conversation, to politeness, to just being a human on a daily basis, that I think, if you're young and you're hungover and you don't want to have to talk to somebody at 7 o'clock in the morning, that's fine. But most of us are not. And there are a lot of lonely old people in this city, especially, who their lives are so much richer because there's someone at the front door of their building who they can talk to about the weather, about the ball game, about anything. Just a person to be there, a nice person to know your name, to know who you are, to have a 1 or 10 minute conversation with every day. I think that's an incredibly valuable service. And I think that's really what the job is. And
Mhm.
I feel like I'm grateful always to have these guys out there to talk to if I want to, and if I'm in a rush, I don't need to. And it's sort of it's a lovely relationship sometimes, but it's also, they're being paid essentially to be friends, and that is a little bit uncomfortable. At least for me, it is. And I try at once not to think about it too much, but also to be aware of it. That yes, we're chit chatting, but it's these guys' jobs.
Yeah, yeah. Like the Uber Eats. Let's bring up another order of Uber Eats tonight. Yeah. That's where all the delivery stuff has changed. Is you're running food up and down all the time. It's really,
Yeah.
really interesting. So when do you write? Do you get up in the morning and morning write or afternoon or whenever?
No, not whenever. I get up in the morning. I take a shower, I eat breakfast, I put on real clothes without elastic pants, and I leave the apartment.
Hmm.
And I go somewhere else to work for the morning. I am not good at working at home, and largely I think that's a legacy of having been home with children for a very long time. And there's always something to be done. There's always laundry to do, or there's dinner to prep, or even for me, there's a wall to repaint because I procrastinate. And so I learned pretty early in this career, this part of my career, that I was not good at working at home. And so I don't really even try. I leave. And I work in the mornings until lunchtime usually, and I very often have lunch with somebody. And in the afternoon, I do other things, and they're very often work. They're just not writing. They're not the original writing. There's a lot of stuff to being an author that's not just the making up of the story part. And that's the part that I do in the morning, and the rest of the stuff I do in the afternoon.
Yeah, it used to be we're just writing. When we first started the company, you read on the back of a book, Chris Pavone lives in New York with his wife and his two kids and their dog. That's all you knew. You didn't know
Yeah.
anything. You didn't know what or other authors he knew. You knew nothing. And when we started, that's what we were trying to do was get people to know the authors and get to know why they wrote their stories. And almost 29 years later, we're still doing that. But a lot of other things have changed, like, as we were going along. I mean, our original idea was to do videos of authors in Barnes and Noble bookstores. And when they asked us what color the TV would be and who would turn the tape on and off, I was like, well, this is not going to work. But it's interesting now because you have a personality that people come to know, and they're writing people on social media and they're expecting answers. And it's a different level of interacting with the reader than it ever was before. Where in San Francisco and what's the name of the dog? Like you didn't know, really. Nothing mattered.
Can I tell you something about dogs?
Sure, sure, sure.
Every one of my books has a sentence or two that is subtly from the point of view of a dog. And it's not necessarily something that anybody else would notice, but I know it. I know it's there. I know it's for me, and it's for my dogs.
Right.
And though they obviously don't read.
It's all right. But I'm thinking of you guys. I'm really
Yeah.
thinking of you. You got gave me a good line over there.
But there's a dog who's a character in this book. There's two dogs who are characters in this book, and one of them I think is a sympathetic character, and one of them is a not sympathetic character, even though I actually don't think they're unsympathetic dogs.
Right. No, no, no. Dogs have
Yeah,
their own little lifestyles, their own
they
little
do.
things.
Yeah.
Do you slip in notes when you're not writing? Like if you come up with something in the afternoon, do you send yourself a note? Do you do something like that just to
Oh my
try
God, I
to
do it
use
all
it?
the time, all the time. I never stop taking notes. And recently, the past few years, that's been mostly a question of typing them into my phone.
Hmm.
But I also very often have a notebook, a little notebook with a little built-in pen that I use for that. And I never stop developing new book ideas, even when I'm in the midst of writing. And sometimes I have ideas for the book that I'm working on, but sometimes I have ideas that I know are not for the book I'm working on. And instead of trying to just shove it into the book because I think it's a good idea, I put it elsewhere for another book because I don't want to shove ideas into books that don't belong. I don't want to I know that I will write another book. I don't need
Hmm.
everything to be in this one, and I don't want to fill up whatever this one is with stuff that would be better off elsewhere. And so luckily that means that whenever it's time for me to start a new book, I already have a lot of material for it. I already have a lot of material for 10 books. And the question really is which book I see the most clearly and what book do I think is right for me to write now? And that for me, it was pretty clear that The Doorman was the book that I should write when I started writing it. And I'm very glad that I did. I think it's an incredibly timely book that's even more timely now than it was a few years ago when I started writing it.
Hmm.
Um, but I had notes for 10 other books, and I still have those notes, and I'm still adding to those notes on a regular basis. And when I get back to writing a novel, I'm already pretty far along in it.
Pretty far along what you want to do. Yeah, it's when you first write, did you know how you were going to finish this one? Did you know how it was going to end?
No, I didn't. And that was part of what my problem was when I first started writing it. But then when I forced myself to stop writing and figure it out and plot it out and outline it, then I did know what was going to happen at the end. But I had a very interesting experience the first time I published a book, and that was The Expats, which I started writing when I was an expat in 2008, 2009. And then we moved back to New York, and I finished it, and I went out to lunch with a well-known editor, a publisher who knew a lot about crime fiction and edited a lot of great books. And he read the manuscript, and we went out to lunch. And in typical publishing lunch fashion, we did not discuss the thing that we were there to discuss until the check had come. And he paid the bill, and he said, "Chris, I like the book very much, but not enough happens." And he
Mm.
didn't give me any more detail, and he left, frankly, and he left me with that sort of bombshell. I thought that this book was great. I thought we were ready to sell it. I thought he was going to publish it. And I realized that a couple of things. One, he was absolutely right. Two, it's not his job to tell me what else should happen. That's what I'm for. And three, I could just sit around for a little while and try to figure out what else can happen.
Hmm.
And that idea that just because you've gotten to the end doesn't mean you've gotten to the end. It means you've gotten to an end.
Hmm.
Is that the right end? Is that enough of an end? And so I spent a few months figuring out what else can happen in this book. And I realized that I could add an extra twist onto the ending so that the ending was no longer the real ending. There's now a new ending. And that required going back and seeding the entire book with this new plot twists preambles that were going to appear throughout that would make that make sense at the very end.
Hmm.
And that was such a satisfying experience. And I think it made that first book of mine so much better than
Hmm.
it would have been had I not done that bit of work. And that bit of work, mind you, was like 6 months of work. That was not a small bit of work. That was a lot of work, but it made the book so much better. And I don't think we need more books in the world faster. I
Yeah.
think we need better books. And
Hmm.
I feel like that he taught me this very valuable lesson. This book, I don't know what he would have rated it on a 1 to 10 scale. I would have rated it a 7. A 7 is perfectly fine to get published. There are plenty of threes out there being acquired by major publishing houses. But the difference between a 7 and a 10 or a 9 is everything.
Hmm.
And I could make it so much better if I just took the time to make it so much better. And I
Hmm.
decided I could try to do that for every book. And I have. Every time I've gotten to the end, I've set it aside and thought, what else can you make happen here? And I've
Hmm.
always discovered something, and it has always made the book richer and more complex, and I think more satisfying and more twisty, more surprising, but surprising in a way that completely makes sense. And it's now become an integral part of my process that just because I've gotten to my original plan of the end doesn't mean that's the end.
Hmm.
You
Means
know
it's
what I
like,
mean? Yeah.
yeah, it means like, let me have a conversation with myself. Is this what I want to be delivering to the reader? And you're right. So much is coming out a book a year. It's coming out like this. And you're there like, they all can't be great. They all can't be great. They
No, they
all
all
can't
can be
be.
great, but I think I've had this experience. Maybe
Yeah.
you've had it too, reading a book or watching a movie or watching a television show, and you get to the end and you thought, wouldn't it be better if
Yes, yes.
this happened? And I try to do that. And so there are a lot of reasons to not do that because by the time you've gotten to the end, you've gotten to the end, and you want to move on with your life. You want to do the next thing.
Yeah.
And you don't want to spend 6 months or a year reconsidering what that should have been. But again, I'm not in any rush. People are not relying on me to deliver a book a year. I'm not delivering a book a year. I'm not in any publisher's business plan for 2028. I'm writing my books at the schedule that allows me to make them the best possible books I can make, not the fastest possible books.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's like it's not like, oh, it's going to be out next year. Oh, when I saw the book, I was like, wow, I'm really looking forward to reading this. This looks like something I would be really interested in, including, let's start here. The title, The Doorman, was that always it? Was it always the
That was
doorman?
always it.
Always the
And you've worked in publishing a long time, as have I. Titles are hard. And titles are, if you don't have them right from the very get-go, you almost never get them right.
doorman.
It's not like title number 30 is appreciably better than title number 20. They're all C minus. And
Hmm.
it's just a question of pulling the plug and saying, all right, this is the title that nobody hates at this moment. And in truth, I have not loved all of my titles. I think the titles can be very hard. I love this title. I
Hmm.
love this title also because I know what I do for a living, and a lot of people who work in the publishing business, my publishers, know the types of books I write. That I write a type of I think complex, intelligent suspense for readers who really care about the details. And if you know that I write complex suspense and you see this title, The Doorman, you know a lot.
Hmm.
You've already learned a lot about what's going to be going on in this
Right.
book. And that shorthand of being able to have readers know what's going on before they even start page one is
Hmm.
such an important part of the reading experience, I think. And it's so valuable to be able to have a title that communicates something other than just the genre. And I think I had a wonderful conversation here in my apartment when I was in the middle of writing this book, and a guy who's a CEO of a publishing house other than mine asked me what I was working on, and I said, it's called The Doorman. And he took a couple of beats, thought about it, and he said, oh my God, I can't believe nobody's done that before. And he
Right.
immediately saw the whole thing.
Right.
And I asked him what he thought was going to go on, and he didn't get it all right, but he got a lot right
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a
just from
lot.
the title and knowing what it is I do. And that to me is a very, very valuable experience. I
Hmm.
had I was a cookbook editor for a while, and
Hmm.
one of the books that I worked on in a small capacity was a Martha Stewart book, and I had the pleasure of being able to go into a launch meeting one day and present this book, Martha Stewart Baking, and pretty much drop the mic. Like there's nothing else that I needed to say
Right.
at that point.
Right.
Everybody could see the price point. They could see what was going to be on the cover. They knew everything about the book. That's an immense luxury in the book publishing business, which,
Right.
as you know, we produce 1 million products a year. And how do you differentiate those products from each other? How do you communicate to readers what type of experience they're going to have here? The first step is the title, and
Hmm.
it's so hard to get it right, especially because so many titles are essentially one word.
Right.
And
Right.
this one, the doesn't mean anything.
Yep.
The
Yep.
title is just doorman,
Doorman.
but it does something, and I'm very grateful that I had it from the get-go.
Yeah. No, no, no. Because as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, I know where this is going. I know what, well, I know who this is going to be. I know something
Yeah,
about this guy, and I know who, yeah. But I also love the color because I think we're going into summer with this book. I think it's going to, notice I changed my shirt to make sure I match the cover. I mean, I
thank
do
you.
that. Sometimes people get it. Sometimes like, do you realize I'm wearing a wolf sweater and I get the air conditioning like flying here because it's really hot. But no, I got to work with the cover. That is going to make the thing pop.
I
But I
appreciate
just
that.
feel like it, like it truly, truly, truly works. And the audiobook is narrated, and we talked about the audio being, or I talk about the audio being so important these days. And you've got Eduardo Ballerini doing the audio. I mean, I'm dying to get a listen to that because I could just picture him doing the book. First choice, of course. And how did that all happen? Was it like a quick decision?
Well, it's not my decision. Macmillan Audio proposed him to me, and it just so happens that I know Eduardo, and I thought, yes, Eduardo sounds great. And then he came to my apartment to sort of experience this building and to get a sense of what it was like. And we went out to lunch and talked about the book. And I'm very glad that it worked out that way. I haven't had that experience with other audios. But I'm really glad that it seems to be something that everybody likes, the
If you,
audio.
have you heard it yet? Have you had a chance to hear it, or is it like
No,
still?
I don't want to. I
Okay.
mean, I don't particularly want to read my books once I've finished them, and I certainly don't really want to listen to them.
Okay.
It's it's something. It's such a big part of what goes on in my head for years, and then having somebody else read it who's not me and doesn't sound like me and doesn't sound like I think the characters sound like, I think would worry me too much. And
Yeah, I can picture
I
that.
don't see an upside to it. I
I can
only see
picture that. I can
downside.
picture
Yeah.
it. I don't know you that well, but I can picture going, oh, no, no, this is not good. Oh, no, 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 that inflection. Whoa, whoa. You know what's really funny though? You say you came to your apartment, you went out to lunch. When I started in this business, I didn't realize everything revolved around food. So
Yeah.
when we would get together for meetings, people said, well, I'm not free for lunch for 4 months. And I'm like, how about if I just come to your office? And they're like, no, cocktails? Like I could do that in 2 months. And I was like, what is this with these people and food? Like, can't we just get together? And they're like, nope, everything revolves around food, drinks, something. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I think that's the reason I love Zoom. Every once in a while, can't we just do that? Okay, you can hold your drink. It's really okay. But I couldn't get meetings for the longest time because I said, well, we have to do a lunch. I'm like, oh, okay, we'll do a lunch whenever.
Well, I'll tell you, Carol, I love the lunches. I thought that that was, and a big part of my experience of being an editor was going out to lunch. And actually, the main thing that I miss about having a job, and so I recreated it, and I go out to lunch 1 or 2 days a week, almost always at Balthazar.
Hmm.
And I have lunch, and it's very specifically with people in the book publishing business,
Right.
not necessarily my people, but other people, publishers and editors and agents and other novelists, just the wider book selling community. And I think it's great. I think that type of in-person
Oh,
interaction over food and alcohol has always been to me an important part of the publishing business and a part of it that makes it enjoyable.
right before COVID, I had dinner with somebody in publishing. We had a 4 hour dinner, 4 hour dinner. We
Yeah,
sat just talking. And she says, I'm dying to come back and do that again because I have to say that when I do it, I enjoy it. I'm just saying it was kind of funny for me that that's the only way you could talk to somebody is if you had food in front of you or drink, right? But
yeah,
I do agree because you get to know people and you get to know what matters at their house. I ask people a lot of questions. I'm always big on not just the book we're talking about or your line, like what's going on in the industry, what are you seeing? And I find that
yeah.
that's enormously important for me to get the bigger picture. I mean, I've never worked at a house, never did that, never
Mm.
worked in publishing. So my view is purely as a reader, and it's like
Hmm.
what to deliver to readers. It's completely different. So you did something that was really interesting. Actually, I read it this morning. And you shared some scenes that are not in the book or in the book in a different way in an ebook pre-pub. And
Yeah.
I've often thought that this is a great idea for authors.
Mm.
They'll say, I cut this scene or I had this different ending. And I think that to show a reader that and to show them like what you're going to have, I love those, I guess was 30, 40 pages that I read this morning. And it refreshed my memory of a book that I had read and knew a lot about and had a lot of
Hmm.
fold down about pages. But it got me back into your head about the book and the way that didn't make it there, but it would like what you were doing. So tell us about that because I thought it was such a smart thing to do.
Thank you. Um, the An early draft of the manuscript had two scenes that were serving very, very similar purposes. They were both about when you take progressive values a little too far,
Mhm.
and in fact end up on the far side of progressive, which is possibly fascist. And I realized that um, I only needed not only not needed, I could only have one of these scenes. That it doesn't make sense to have two of them. One of them was more integral to the plot,
Mhm.
and so I kept that one because it was more integral to the plot. The other one was, I thought, better and more enjoyable and more insightful about the political moment we live in, but not relevant to the plot or not necessary to the plot. So I excised that one, but I missed that scene. I missed that type
Mhm.
of interaction. It's about a parents' association meeting, and I think if there's anything right now that is a flashpoint in the cultural wars, it's parents' association
Yes.
meetings and
Yes.
the idea of who is in control of what type of language we use in school and what types of things we teach our children and who makes those choices and who gets to countermand those choices. Um, and I love this scene. I love the characters in the scene. I love how Emily, the protagonist of the book, behaves in this scene. But it was no longer in the book.
Mhm.
So I decided that I could turn it into a short story, and the scene would survive in that way. And I integrated some material that is in the book into this short story. So it's not as if this is not a bonus scene in the life of the novel. It's a completely separate thing that stands on its own. It has overlap with the novel.
Hmm.
Um, and largely it is a way of just being able to maybe introduce some new readers into this story who might not otherwise come to it
Hmm.
because it is about a parents association meeting, and a story about a parents association meeting is not necessarily the audience that is going to come to a thriller.
Hmm.
But the themes in both stories are the same, and I that's one of the things that I was trying to accomplish. If you like this story, you should read this book, even if you don't think this book is for you.
Hmm. Hmm. My book group is made up of people younger than me. They all have young kids. It's
Yeah,
great because I always host because I don't have to clean up. Like, it's like, fine, I'm just a couple of things away. And you can just get out, like, just come over to my house. And I want them to read the book because I want to be talking about my kids are older as your kids are older. And I am so glad right now that I'm not dealing with a lot of issues at school that are the lightning bolt points that you're big splits and friendships and whatever are happening about. And it's really, really interesting to me. And you hit on it in the book of like, ooh, this is how we feel. And how do you feel about this? And what's your, and it's a lot more volatile than, thinking about like, are we going to spend more money on the football field than we're going to
yeah,
spend on something else? I think you did a really good job by doing that because you're really telling people, okay, you're coming into it a different way. There's going to be a lot more in this book than what you're just thinking about the doorman. You're
yeah.
setting it up.
Thank you.
So also what you've written would make a great film or series. I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that, especially with so much. Okay, there's the thing. A lot happens in one building. And Chris, what I've learned is you don't want to have a lot of sets because like they canceled Bosch because it's so big a production and everybody makes so much money. And I remember Mitch Kaplan when he started his film company, he came over to me and he goes, "What books?" And I told him, he goes, "Too many scenes, too many sets, too many this." So like, hey, we got one building. So it would be delightful for a shooting crew. So is there interest? Is there like I'm sure you can't disclose yet, but any conversations?
Of course, but I can't disclose it.
Good, but I'm just glad they're having the conversations.
Thank
If
you.
if not, I was gonna have to write somebody. I was gonna have to tell them. So those 10 ideas, do you have any idea what you're doing next, or you're like, let's get through this next couple of weeks?
Well, my priority right now is launching this book. But speaking of the other coast and their business, I have been involved in the past uh, year and a half of trying to turn one of my other novels into a
Mm-hmm.
film. And it's been a very, very interesting and enjoyable process for me, and largely because it's new.
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point in life, new things stop happening to you, just as
Mm-hmm.
a matter of course. And in order for you to have new experiences, you need to go out of your way to create them. And so I
Mm-hmm.
went out of my way to create this new experience for me, which was to write a screenplay. And I had a lot to learn. I still obviously have a lot more to learn, but the learning has been the fun part. And if it never goes any farther than it's got now, I have no expectation that anybody's ever going to sit in a theater. Sorry about the sirens.
Okay. Okay.
And watch this on a screen. I don't care. That for me, the journey has been the destination for this project, and it has been incredibly fun for me to have this experience of working with different types of people, working in a different way, collaborating in a way that novelists don't really do, and learning something,
Mm-hmm.
and having conversations that I are much more in depth and nuanced than I expected, and honestly, much more in depth than most of the conversations I've had editorially about my books. That
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
there's so much more at stake and so many more people involved and so many more stakeholders, and everything counts so much more.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't cost a publisher anything to have an unnecessary scene in the book, but
Mm-hmm.
to have an unnecessary minute of a movie can cost $1 million.
Yeah.
And so it's important for everything to justify itself. And that's a very refreshing and important, I think, thing to remind myself as a novelist sometimes, that it needs to have a reason to be here. And working on a film um, has really hammered that home. Justify why this is here. If you can't justify it, then it shouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm. And you're also doing something else because books are part of pop culture. And pop culture has changed so much over the last years. Streaming this. What's your competition now? Your competition is anything that's streaming. I mean, sometimes if you don't watch it the first week, you forget you were supposed to watch it. I actually have like a list. And my husband is an engineer. He's brilliant. He builds like fabulous things. But every night it throws the remote to me and says, "Here, find it. You know where it is." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Really? You really couldn't get to Apple if I wasn't around?" Like, honestly, this is my biggest job in life. But that's our competition right now with books, and that's our competition right now in the world. So to understand the process to get to that writing or whatever is huge because you say, I think it sharpens everything around you. Of when I watch an adaptation, when I watch something, I'm constantly thinking about like, what did they cut? Why did they keep this? What did they do? I'm a terrible
Yeah.
watcher. I drive him crazy. He said he always gets the end, which is even worse, you know. So I was like, no. But when it's clever, when it's really good, when it's well done, when it's a new take on something, it's really interesting to see how did you get to that point. And you're right, there's so many more people involved. I mean, one time I did an interview with Megan Abbott, and
Yeah.
we were in Morristown, and the other author hadn't showed. So I said, "You want her to talk about making a film or a series, or you want her to answer questions?" They said, "Go," and she just did this, and you're just people were just like, "Wow, never knew." Really hard to shoot a cheerleader movie where you only get the football field for 2 days. I learned that. Learned that. Chris, this has been a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. We wish you much success. I'm going to be talking this book up. This is like, this and like Broken Country are my two books right now. I just want you to know that I'm going for this big because I think what you do is you talk about culture today. And I think it's a really important thing to be talking about of how we're looking at it, how we're looking at the world.
Mm,
And it's not black and white. It's really nuanced.
thank you. I appreciate it. It's great talking to you, Carol, always. Thanks so much for having me on.
And thank you for your time. And to everybody else, we look forward to seeing you next time on Book Reporter Talks To.